here.
Are you sure?
Yeah, here.
Oh, it's amazing. I didn't think it would happen. Oh, it's
they've
amazing.
come.
When was it about a year ago? We were a year ago, Stephanie and I were in Papua New Guinea. And we sort of landed in a helicopter, and we'd been invited to photograph a tribe that we'd been told had never actually been photographed or filmed before.
The Kaluli.
The Kaluli. And there were these magnificent people, and they had these headdresses that sort of reached to the sky. And we'd arrived there, and we were in the helicopter, and you looked down and said, there they are. And I'd been terrified, because I could not believe that anybody could warn them of our arrival. But it was okay, so we relaxed and we landed. And I remember really sort of leaping out of the helicopter. And I sort of ran up to them and said, hey, Stephanie, it's Jimmy, we're here to see you. And what did they do in unison? They looked at us and they went,
Jimmy, who?
I said, what? You can't be serious. We've come all the way from the other side of the world to come and see you, to come and photograph you. You have no idea who we are. And they were just sort of shaking at us, waving their hands. And obviously we couldn't talk to them. So we started saying, we're here to see the Kaluli and these headdresses. And they suddenly looked at us and their eyes lit up. Do you remember? And they pointed up on top of the mountain to Mount Masani. They said, there, up there. They said, yeah, but you're going to have to come with us. It'll take about 2 days to walk there.
So they said, come, off we go. So we walked into the jungle. It was hot, it was muddy. We crawled, we swam. Leeches started to attach themselves onto our bare legs, and they had a really good trick. They had these huge machetes to cut their way through the jungle, and they...
But I remember they came up behind you, and they were sort of, as if they were going to attack you with the machetes, but they came up and they stroked the leeches off your legs.
Like a big razor, yeah.
And this went on for about 2 days, and then eventually we came out of the jungle, we landed at this, essentially, this sort of, almost a Shangri-La in the middle of the highlands of Papua New Guinea. And there they were standing there. They weren't waiting for us, but they were curious. Who are you? Who are you, Jimmy and Stephanie? And we've come to see you. We've come to see you in all your glory and all your magnificence. And they were a bit afraid at the beginning. And we were very humble, we were very small. Yeah. But slowly, and they said, but you've got no food. And then they started to present us, do you remember?
We have some food. Yeah, big maggots.
And then we sort of joined in, we started to live with them. We sort of slowly ingratiated ourselves into the community. Yeah. And slowly the drums started to come and the rhythm started to arrive. And then they started to come. It was incredible. They arrived in all their beauty. Do you remember?
Yeah, true. People always ask us, when I come back from these journeys, people say, how do you communicate? They don't speak English. How do you do it? And Jimmy, don't take it personally. But does everybody know Mr. Bean? Well, I always describe Jimmy as Mr. Bean with a tripod and a camera chasing. But I think the best way to demonstrate is, I'm going to find a chief.
If you sort of refer to Mr. Bean, and thank you very much, Stephanie, it's an interesting analogy. Mr. Bean can communicate with the whole world. Whichever aircraft you ever travel on, you see him there communicating with you, but he never says a word. He does it by being extremely vulnerable, and through that vulnerability, he forms an empathy of communication. So when we arrive in the village, we're very small, there's no cameras, there's no nothing, we sit sometimes for days, until the worms arrive, and we sleep and we wake. And then eventually we sort of come. And the chief is there, and he's looking down at us. We've given him or her the authority. We said, but you're magnificent. Come, you're incredible. And we look up and say, I'd love to take a picture of you. And I use this very old plate film camera, and we start to build it on a tripod. And I start to look. I say, stand up tall. You're incredible. And your feathers and your hair. You're absolutely incredible. And it becomes like a sort of hero worship. And we're dancing around, and your chest becomes bigger. But then we need help. Go back to the village, go and get the others.
We need lights.
I mean, I need help, I need light. I need to light the chief, because we're in the middle of the jungle, there's no electricity, there's absolutely nothing. But I carry with me many reflectors. So we go back to the villagers and say, come, I need help to light up the chief. Can you guide him? You light him over there.
Here, if you hold the reflector.
Big reflectors.
Yeah, you hold it like that.
And we shine it on the chief there. And then you come with me over here. Come. As the sun, you see the sun is up there, you see the chief, and you shine it on him down there. And we get back down, Chief, stand up straight, be strong, you're incredible, that's it. We get back down, and we wait, and we focus, and we get the camera ready, and that one sheet of film, and we put it into the camera, and bang. And if it gets right, we make a picture. It's incredible, you're amazing. But what's very exciting is, and this is what happens, this man comes, he says, I'm much more important than this chief, we're going to swap. So you stand here, and you've got to light up this chief, and this dance goes on for days and days and days. The whole village comes out, And everybody comes in all their pride and their glory, their feathers, their costumes, their music, and it goes on for days and days and days. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Again, once we've done that,
Jimmy has this obsession with all the natural wonders of the world. And one of them is waterfalls. So I remember we passed a waterfall when we were walking to Mount Pasavi. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to have a group of people standing underneath a waterfall?
Yeah, so we sort of, we're on the way, we asked them, can you come back with us into the jungle? So we start going back into the jungle. Obviously, having spent a couple of weeks with them, they start to follow us. And we find these magnificent settings. We're there, you've got to focus, you've got to communicate. There's no lights, there's no reflectors. But you've got to say, stand, own the jungle, own yourselves, own your tribe, own your pride. But if you get it right, this is what you're going to end up with. And it's just a picture, but it's the picture for the end of an amazing process.
Obsession come from? It's passion, but it's close to obsession.
An obsessive Mr. Bean now.
Yes.
Okay,
what drives you?
It is an obsession, and it is a passion, but I think that passion goes back a long, long time. And it's only in more recent years that I've begin to understand what this was me as a child. I had this magnificent childhood. I lived in the bush. My father worked in developing countries, but at a very early age, they sent me to an institution in Northern Europe where I had to be educated. I had to learn to read and write. But I always missed those extraordinary connected moments of my childhood living in the bush. So I had this bipolar childhood, flying backwards and forwards across the world alone to these extraordinary communities and back towards this institution. And when I was 16, I was somewhat sort of, as a lot of teenagers could be, a bit disorientated, and I became ill. I had cerebral malaria, and I was sent back to this institution. I remember going to my parents to keep me at home, but they said, well, we don't know how to, you've got to go back. And I went back and I was ill, and I went to the teachers of the school, and I said, help me, and they very naively gave me the wrong medicine. And I remember going to bed, waking up the next morning, and this is how I woke up. I essentially woke up, to all intents and purposes, as a teenager with a new face. All my hair had fallen out in about 10 hours, and I was terrified. I looked, who the hell is that in the mirror? And then I remember leaving the bathroom thinking, it's okay, I'm still Jimmy, I'm still the same person. But then I came to my peers, and they looked at me, and they judged me. So I ran away. A few months later, I ran away, and I didn't tell anybody. I was about 17. I bought a one-way ticket, and I spent the next 2 years crossing Tibet. Now, inspired, this is where the science comes in, inspired by Tintin. I remember reading him as a child and empathizing with him and his adventures and his journeys, and thinking, where on the planet can I go with other children who look like me? And that had to be the monks in Tibet. And what was fantastic, yes, real science. And what was fantastic at that period was, and it was also traumatic, the Tibetans, they'd been cut away for 35 years. Nobody had been going there. And by accident and default, I got to places that I shouldn't have got to. And I realized the whole of their culture was being annihilated. They used to have about 660 functioning working monasteries. And in 1986, there were only 3 left. But despite that pain, despite that torture, despite that cultural destruction, they were there for me. They brought me back to life. They said, you're okay, Jimmy, as you look, as you feel, as you are. We will love you. And in those 2 years, I started to take pictures, the pictures of the people who were kind to me, the pictures of the people who brought me back to life, and that became my journey, a never-ending journey of using the camera to see the other, but to see the other as perhaps I would like to be seen myself.
And then you published an amazing book, right? How long was that ago?
Well, it was about 4 years ago, a book called Before They Pass Away, and people said, you now have to start collating these stories, collating these images. So the book was published, and it began to take off, and it actually became quite exciting. And there was a lot of press. I don't think there was one publication in the world that didn't discuss the book. But what they went on to further was to start discussing me. Who are you, Jimmy? What's this about? Do you have any qualifications to talk about these people? Do you have any qualifications to exoticize them with your camera in the way that you do?
Yeah, I remember there was a lot of press and people started to ask you some very, very serious questions.
Yeah, it became quite heated. I mean, there was one particular gentleman, he started saying Jimmy Nelson's wrong-headed obsession with vanishing indigenous cultures. I was very much being pushed into a corner.
Yeah. And this is actually the moment when I met Jimmy. And I walked up to Jimmy and introduced myself. And I said, hey, I used to be a lawyer.
I need a lawyer?
No, you don't need a lawyer. I used to be a lawyer. Let me explain. I grew up also with a camera, just like Jimmy. And my father was a commercial airline pilot. And he flew me all around the world. and I fell deeply in love with the beauty of our planet. But still I didn't dare to listen to my inner feeling and my dreams, and I ended up studying civil law, of all things. And this is when I met Jimmy, and I realized I really wanted to get back behind the camera, because this is where I was happiest, and I needed to join him on his journeys. And what was one of our first journeys together?
I think it was actually nice that we're here today.
It was Mexico, yeah.
And we sort of came to Mexico, and what was very special, to be honest, it was this very personal journey between the two of us. There was this moment of synchronicity that you find somebody that understands how you feel, this very romantic, this very indulgent, this very subjective way of looking at the world in all its cultural beauty and diversity, and wanting to present and share and document and talk about.
Yeah, but it was so extraordinary. I thought this can't just be about photography, it has to go beyond. So I started to film as well.
Yeah. Mexico is very familiar. It seems almost close. Yet if one takes time, one looks beyond, one goes deep, one is presented with cultural treasures that go beyond your wildest imagination. Rarely have I or Stephanie on our journeys met such warm and kind people who were so willing, in many ways desperate, to share their stories, to show who they really are, and that was often presented with very personal tears. We danced, and with the sound of the maracas still in my ears, I hope you hear them with me as you see the pictures to come.
Then I thought, thank you. Then I thought, whoa, I can't just film this. We are meeting all these beautiful people. I have to write about them too. So I started to interview almost all the individuals, and I started to ask them very humble, human questions. What are your dreams? What are your fears? How do you love? Yeah, what do you aspire? How do you see your future? How do you see the world? And I think that's when you came up to me one morning and continued with ideas and said, Jimmy, I've got something else for you. I want to talk to you about 360. It's called virtual reality. Yeah, I'm going to follow us. Everywhere we go, I'm going to record us with a 360 camera, and we can take people actually on our journey so they can indulge in this VR world. And how exactly did that work? What exactly was it? It's a tripod with a camera rig with six GoPros on it, and it films every angle. There's no escape. I don't quite understand it, but on that thing, we have to go further. We have to make a new book. Yeah. So we made a new book, which has just been published a month ago. But that was a book about taking this discussion further, carrying on with this journey, carrying on with these questions, and perhaps this time looking for greater answers, like here with the quieres, with the Wadabi in central Sudan, these magnificent people who live within these communities, and all this cultural diversity. Yeah, we started to gather maps, we started to gather information, all the interviews got incorporated in the book. Yeah. And then we had to do this. Now, we had all this content, and we went to a publisher, and they said, well, this is too much for a book. And then we said, well, we're going to make something different. We're going to make something that has never been made before. So if you can use the analogy of an iceberg, the print is above the water, the digital content of our book is below, and this is how you're going to get access to it. Welcome to the introduction of how to use the app for Jimmy Nelson's book, Homage to Humanity. To get started, download the free Jimmy Nelson app, available both on iOS and Android devices. Once downloaded, you can scan your smartphone over every single image in the book, and that will activate exclusive video content which gives a far greater insight into the images. Once you've scanned 1/3 of the images in each chapter with your smartphone, you will then gain access to exclusive virtual reality footage. Whilst you're scanning the book with your smartphone, you will be able to keep track of your progress and always see which pictures are still to be opened. And this journey doesn't stop here.
Wherever you see a picture displayed from Homage to Humanity, it will always be scannable with your smartphone.
Jimmy, I have one final question for you.
A burning question.
What is this all about? What is the deeper message you want to communicate?
Yeah, it's extremely important. I've got to actually take you back to the Kazakh. The Kazakh are these wondrous, these magnificent, these cinematographic icons. They live in northwestern Mongolia in the Altai Mountains. And when I first went there were only 40 of these Kazakh eagle hunters left. And I promised them when I made the pictures, one day I will come back. And last year we went back, and I went back with the pictures. And I remember looking at them, they said, "Oh, Jimmy, you've come back, great, thank you." But they actually said, "You're not the first to come back because something wondrous has happened in the last few years."
Yeah, and what has been so wonderful about working together as a team is that I get a totally different perspective as a woman. So I was able to take Jimmy into a whole different layer, the world of women. Young girls came up to me, they shared their secrets. The older women, they took me in as a daughter, and I kept finding these amazing stories. And when we were back in Mongolia, one of the very first female eagle huntresses, she came up to us and she recognized Jimmy. She said, "Hey,
she said,
I have a
come around the
surprise."
back. And she took us around the back, and she came and she proudly stood in front of us. Here she is, with her hat and her coat, and the eagle on her shoulder. And she said, "Look," and we sort of looked, and we both stood there going, and she said, "I've named him." And we sort of looked, and we were sort of on bated breath, and she was very silent, and she said, "His name is Jimmy." Now, if you've ever wanted to go on a journey, a lifelong journey of trying to discover who you are, this had to be the moment. And with that, we leave you with this.
In 1899, Edward S. Curtis was despised for photographing the beauty of Native Americans. Nobody recognized the importance of his work until most of their culture was wiped out. Almost a century later, an English photographer started a similar journey. Jimmy Nelson devoted his life to photographing indigenous cultures across the world, before their cultures are lost forever. Because we're losing the world's last indigenous cultures as a result of globalization and advancing technologies.
I deeply feel that I want to present them to you in a way that you've never seen them before, shone in the most glorious light that there is, because I want them to see their value.
A perspective not everyone shares.
Every photograph that has ever been made is subjective. It's the truth of the photographer.
The beauty of the world is the history, the sourcing of it, the soul of it. And the indigenous people are the soul of where it all started.
The photos are starting to have a surprising effect. After Jimmy visited the Kazakh in Mongolia,
Here we go. This is beautiful.
their cultural group quadrupled. Kazakh members living elsewhere had seen his pictures and reconnected with their traditions. So if we want to preserve these cultures and our own in a world that faces a growing identity crisis, we need to celebrate them.
There is a wisdom that we have lost, and we can regain it, and it starts by respecting what indigenous cultures have to teach us.
If we become homogenized, if we become all grey, we all become the same, then we will lose the connection and the value of who we are as authentic human beings.
So Jimmy Nelson invites you to become part of this crucial global discussion on cultural identity by launching his new project, Homage to Humanity, in which Jimmy takes you on his journey to meet a few of the most iconic indigenous cultures still alive.
Look at these people. Look at their beauty. Look at their power. And once that is achieved, we can reflect on who we've become in the same time.
And how can we live together forever with respect in all our cultural diversity? Thank you very much.
Thank you.